So we're going to jump right in to the most common submission mistakes and how to avoid these. These items cause me a lot of labor and time, so I know they must be causing you extra labor and time as well. In the next few slides, I've provided examples of an incomplete versus complete Acord application so that we can review the application through the eyes of an underwriter. So on this slide, I've listed out the most common mistakes that we're going to work through, from the name insured being incorrect to a missing FEIN. So all of these items are crucial in order to provide your insured with an accurate, quick, competitive quote. Okay, so the top snippet is an example of an incomplete application versus a complete one below it. So first thing we're going to go over is the applicant name or the named insured. So the named insured should always go where applicant name, which is highlighted, is listed. A lot of brokers send in submissions and they put the named insured where company is. So you can see Infinity Services is listed at company, but then on the applicant name portion, we have Todd Clark DBA Infinity Services. So we want the insured's business name, how they filed with the state, to be where the applicant name is located. The named insured format should also match the entity selection. So for example, in our incomplete application example, the applicant name is Todd Clark DBA Infinity Services. As an underwriter, I would see that and know that the correct entity type should be a sole proprietor. However, the entity selected on the application, you can see they selected corporation. So immediately something is not adding up as I'm reviewing this. Either the named insured is wrong, which as you see on the incomplete application, we have Infinity Services, but then we also have listed Todd Clark DBA Infinity Services. So my brain's going, okay, which one is the actual named insured? Or did the wrong entity get selected? Did they mean to select sole proprietor instead of corporation? So these are some of the things right away that we can avoid. Years in business, that is an underwriting question that's always asked by the carriers. So it needs to be answered. It's almost always left blank, but what the agent and the insured don't know is that it can actually benefit the insured, as additional credits are sometimes applied to those in business for a long period of time with no claims. The mailing address, that needs to be listed as well. Don't leave that blank and assume that the underwriter is going to know that the mailing address is the same as the physical address. And lastly, the FEIN. You could see on the incomplete application, it's missing. Without this, you cannot quote with any carrier. It is absolutely mandatory. So we can't move forward taking this to any of our markets without the FEIN. So if we look at our completed application, the named insured, it's listed where applicant name is. It includes the DBA, which is another thing. If your business does have a DBA, it's important to include that there. We know that they've been in business for 4 years. The mailing address is provided, as well as the FEIN. And then the entity is marked a corporation. So before we move to the next slide, I wanted to provide you guys with a helpful tip to confirm the applicant name, and you can do so by searching for the insured on the Secretary of State to confirm that what was provided to you on the application is accurate. So I do this a lot whenever I receive an application, especially if the entity and the applicant name aren't adding up. I'll go and search it on the Secretary of State if I have access, and I could pull the statement of information. So it provides you with the named insured, the officers, the entity type, and all the addresses on file. It's very helpful. Okay, the next section of our application asks for the location addresses. So for the top incomplete section, if the mailing and location address are the same, it's fine to put same as mailing address in this section. However, a PO box could never be a location address for workers' comp. And sometimes I receive an application that has a PO box, so I have to go back and let them know this can't be a physical address on file. If there's multiple location addresses, each should be listed out in this section. However, make sure you provide the entire address in full. I provided an example here. They gave me 7452 Chesborough Way, but what is the city? What is the zip code? These seem like easy enough things that you wouldn't make a mistake on, but I do receive applications that have this information. And it just creates a lot of back and forth between myself, the broker, and the insured. The proposed effective date, it says October 9th. So the proposed effective date should always be a date in the future, so that way it provides time for your underwriter to quote the business. Otherwise, if I see an application like this, I immediately have to go back and request additional information. My brain's wondering, are we working from a lapse in coverage? Is coverage in place and they're looking to move midterm? Is this a new venture? So again, there's a lot of back and forth that can be avoided by completing this correctly in the first place. So we see that the completed application for the location address is listed out in full. We have a proposed effective date, which is in the future. So on this section of the Acord application, these are the two sections that I'm looking for to be completed. Next is the contact and ownership information. So the contact information should just include the name, the phone number, excuse me, and an email address. These aren't required to quote, but they are required to bind a policy. So just getting in front of it and providing all the information at once. And then for the ownership information, I see a ton of issues. The first being that the ownership information should be under the included individuals included / excluded. So number one, ownership needs to equal 100%. And number two, this section, when filled out correctly, should include the owner's name, their title within the business, their ownership percentage, and if they wish to be included or excluded. So that's the information I need in order to quote. So in our example for the incomplete application, we see Todd Clark, he's the CEO. The remuneration is provided of $84,000, but what's his ownership percentage? I don't know, so I'll have to go back and ask. I get a lot of brokers who also will list out the business employees by name and their payroll with no classification or description of duties. So you'll see that we have Matt Smith at $69,000. A few issues with this. Number one, employees payroll, this is not where their rating information goes. It's on a separate section. And then two, it makes it difficult to determine if Matt Smith is another owner of the business or if this was placed here by mistake. So make sure that only the officers and those who have ownership of the business are listed in this section. So on the complete application, we have Todd Clark, he's the CEO, 100% ownership, and he wishes to be excluded from coverage. So for the rating section, this is where all of the employee payroll would be inputted. And it's okay if you aren't sure of the class code. If you aren't, it's just important to provide under the categories, duties, and classification section, type in there what's going on with the employee, so that way I can help you to classify that, that business. So along with the employee count and payroll. So in the incomplete application, we have auto dealer store. So I'm assuming the broker didn't know what the correct class code was, and we have payroll at 68,000. So while I appreciate the description, we're missing the full-time and part-time employee count. So I would have to go back and request that. Same for the line underneath, 8391. They actually knew the class code here and provided the full-time and part-time employees, but there's no annual payroll. And it should always be annual. Sometimes on contracting risks, I'll have brokers put their hourly amount of pay, but I would have to go back and request annually because that's what we're rating on for workers' comp. So ideally what we're looking for in order to quote is the class code or description, the employee count broken out by full-time versus part-time, and the corresponding annual payroll. So we have a few questions in the chat that I'm going to answer. The first being, do non-W-2 workers need to be included in the rating of the policy, and would they be counted as employees or subcontractors? So no, they would, if they're a non-W-2 worker, they would not be counted as employees and they should not be rated for on the policy. Subcontractors or 1099 employees should be covered under their own workers' compensation policy. The second question, how do carriers handle a split classification code when an employee is performing two separate functions? So I actually see this often with contracting risks. Sometimes an employee may be doing carpentry work and also painting work. How we decide on what the employee will be classified under is they actually should be rated under the higher classification, whatever the higher rate is for that class, in order to avoid any issues at audit. And we have the third question, how can I get the class code? So there's actually some resources that you guys can utilize. So for California risks, you can reach out to the WCIRB and send them an email basically with the description of work that the insured's doing, and they can help and assist you to classify the business properly. And then all risks that are outside of California, you would reach out to the NCCI. I can go ahead and get that information over to you in an email after the webinar with some more specifics. Moving forward, some other items to address, and they're the last submission mistakes, are ensuring that a description of operations are provided. So you and I need to understand what the business is doing so that the information can assist us in better underwriting the risk. There's a section on the Accord 130 that asks for the nature of the business, so you can provide it there or you can provide it in an email, but make sure to obtain this information from the insured. And then in regards to coverage history, another issue that causes me probably the most amount of extra labor just because of the lack of information that's provided. So I wanted to make this super clear for you all. That way you can obtain this information up front and know what you're asking for. So if we're working from a firm proposed effective date, meaning the insured has current coverage in place and they're potentially coming up for renewal, I need loss runs. That's going to be required. Typically, our carriers ask for 4 years if they've been in business that long. Second thing, lapse in coverage. If we're working from a lapse of coverage, the date of lapse and the reasoning as to why is required, along with the loss runs prior to the lapse. And then if it is a new venture or it's just their first time obtaining workers' comp, this needs to be stated on the Accord 130.